Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's session, we'll discuss 7 important articles as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your comprehensive understanding of the current affairs explained to you in the easiest language possible. The topics are as follows. From your analysis section, in the first topic, we'll try to understand the significant impact of ethanol blending on our energy security as well as its uses in the aviation sustainable fuel. Then, in the second topic, we'll try to analyze the India-Africa relations in the context of the 4th India-Africa Forum Summit, which is being conducted in New Delhi. Then, from a prelims pointer, we'll take up 5 news, where we'll not only try to simplify the news for you, but also provide you the much important value addition, keeping in mind the approaching prelims 2026. So, stay tuned. So, the opposition has recently criticized the government for permitting the use of ethanol in the aviation turbine fuel. So, in this particular topic, we are going to have a holistic discussion about what consists of biofuel, what is ethanol, and how it is different from the aviation turbine fuel. The use of ethanol as an aviation turbine fuel is actually being called out by the opposition, calling it a potential risk to the aviation safety. The aviation sector as well as biofuel, which basically consists an important component of your GS3 paper under the larger theme of energy sector. So the first question which shall be arising in your mind can be, what are biofuels? Biofuels are nothing but the fuels which are actually produced from the fermentation of various kind of biomass. What consists biomass? For example, your wood, agricultural waste, animal waste, municipal waste, oil seed crops, or your algae, etc. So you guys can recall that how India is a very agriculturally rich country. For example, very recently we have become the largest producer of rice as well as exporter of rice in the world. Or for example, if we refer to the Indian State of Forest Report of 2023, about 25% of the total geographical area of the country is actually covered by tree and forest. So yes, indeed, we do have agricultural supply of wood and agricultural waste in our country from which we can actually produce this biofuel. Now, as we have adequate supply of these resources and we can regenerate them, the biofuels are actually considered as replenishable in the nature and thus forms an important component of your renewable energy sector. Thus, in sharp contrast to the fossil fuels, we have very limited supply of these reserves, right? Like for example, petrol and diesel. So you guys can recall that how recently we read about the International Energy Agency report, according to which India is 87% import dependent when it comes to our fossil fuel needs, which can have a very detrimental impact on our balance of payment, especially in the case of supply chain bottlenecks, which can be caused in various kind of, white swan event, like for example, the Iran-Israel war, which is taking place recently. Don't you think it can actually lead to the drainage of our very important forex reserves, leading to the balance of payment crisis? So now imagine an alternative future, where gradually we start transitioning from the use of these fossil fuels to these biofuels for which we have adequate supply. And thus, it can actually have a very pivotal role in ensuring our economic security. That is why the biofuels has actually become the talk of town. Now, how we can actually produce these biofuels? So there are various methods. For example, direct method, we can just burn these biomass, or decomposition can take place through anaerobic digestion, leading to the producing of methane gas, which we again can burn to actually, kind of produce various amount of energy. Or indirect method, where we can actually lead to the conversion to liquid or gas. So for example, the fermentation of this biomass can actually lead to the production of ethanol. What is ethanol? Ethanol is nothing but alcohol, and the chemical formula for that is C2H5OH. So it do contains a significant amount of oxygen. And thus, let's say for example, if we are blending this ethanol with fossil fuel like petrol, the presence of oxygen, large amount of it, actually leads to the complete combustion exercise. Thus, an ethanol blended petrol actually releases less amount of carbon monoxide and hydrocarbons in comparison to a petrol-based energy production. Also, there can be, deconstruction, where high temperature deconstruction through various methods of gasification can lead to the production of hydrogen gas, or pyrolysis, which actually lead to the production of biochar, or hydrothermal liquefaction, which leads to the production of bio-oil. Now, let's try to understand. We are saying that we are trying to establish that India is an agriculturally rich country. So we can assess that yes, indeed, we might be having a large-scale agricultural residue or waste. That was exactly what was highlighted in this article published by The Hindu, where India produces 600 million metric ton of agricultural residue as well as 60 million metric ton of solid waste per year, the burning and dumping of which releases various kinds of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, for example, methane, nitrogen oxide, carbon dioxide, etc. The article suggested that even if we use 30 to 50% of this agricultural residue and solid waste, it can actually lead to the production of 15 to 26 million metric ton of biochar, which will eventually amount for carbon sequestration up to 0.1 gigatons of carbon dioxide annually, as well as the bio-oil which can be produced from this biochar method can actually end up offsetting 12 to 19 million metric ton of diesel or kerosene requirement. Just remember this fact. So basically we have established that yes, indeed, biofuel can actually directly transition to providing our country a very important energy security basket. So are there any steps which has been taken by the government of India? So again, we will refer to another article which was published in Indian Express by the Minister of Petroleum and Natural Gas, who said that till the year of 2014, the entire blending of ethanol which was being done in the petrol was only 1.5% of the total amount of fuel. Thus, taking the cognizance of this, the government came up with National Biofuel Policy 2018, under which we achieved 10% blending of ethanol in petrol by the year of 2022 and 20% blending by the year of 2025 itself. Now the government is targeting to actually achieve the blending of 30% ethanol in, let's say for example, the total amount of petrol by the year of 2030, for which the government has taken several pragmatic steps. First, the oil marketing companies. So they are basically mandated to procure a significant amount of ethanol from the domestic sources. Domestic sources, like for example, the various sugar mills which exist in our country, the various distilleries which exist in our country. So at least more than 25% production shall be from these domestic sources itself. And when these oil marketing companies are actually procuring this ethanol, which is domestically produced from these sugar mills and distilleries, they are required to purchase it at a notified administered price. Thus, this basically acts as a kind of an MSP for the farmers who are actually producing the biomass for ethanol, like for example, sugarcane crop or maize crop, etc. Then the government is saying that, let's say for example, the oil marketing companies have procured this oil and now they are basically transitioning it to those particular refineries where it will be mixed or blended with petrol. So that particular moment will not come under any kind of toll taxation or something. So there is a free movement of ethanol under the Industries Act of 1951. At the same point of time, keep this in mind that when, for example, we are blending this ethanol with petrol, this new fuel which has been produced or created, it has to be adaptable to the engines which is being produced by the automobile companies, and that engine shall be adaptable enough to function on this petrol. So to actually kind of produce more and more amount of such engines called as flex fuel engine, the government has basically brought them under the production linked incentive scheme as well. As well as the government has announced sugar development fund for various kind of ethanol projects as well. Thus, the Minister of Petroleum and Natural Gas in that particular article put impetus upon the fact that this waste to wealth concept has actually led to large scale use of agriculture and municipal solid waste, and thus has significantly reduced import dependency on the crude oil by almost 238 lakh metric tons, for which we are not required to pay any kind of forex reserves. And just imagine the kind of balance of payment enhancement which it has done, saving us almost 1.4 lakh crore rupees in the foreign exchange. As well as this production of biomass in the form of sugar cane and maize, don't you think it will significantly increase the farmer's income, thus kind of achieving the target which was set by Dalvi committee, right? Once it was repeatedly being discussed by the government, but now nobody mentions it, where the idea was that we are basically going to double the farmers' income by the year of 2022, as well as it is actually creating a lot of employment generation in the form of various kind of refineries, distilleries, right? Your sugarcane refineries, etc. And thus, this particular domestic reliance and impetus has actually led to employment generation of more than 1.2 lakh crore income to the farmers. So the minister highlighted that how these annadatas, these farmers who are producing all of this agricultural residue and biomass, they are now transitioning into urja datas. And further, the government is trying that let's start using this blended petrol or blended fuel in the aviation sector also. So a blending mandate has already been initiated with a target of 1% blending for international flights by the year of 2027, ultimately increasing it to 2% by 2028 and scaling further as the supply of this biomass stabilizes. That's what was mentioned. Now let's try to understand that why blending of such fuel, thus leading to the creation of sustainable aviation fuel, is very important for our country. So you guys can recall the indigo crisis which had kind of struck our country in the month of December and January, leading to the kind of overhaul of numerous number of flights. So even when we were discussing about the fundamental challenges which prevails in the aviation sector, one of the very important challenge was the high cost of fuel, which ultimately increased the input cost and thus ultimately kind of also transitions into the costly flight tickets, which is unbearable for the majority of the Indians. So, excessive operating cost. Why? Because this aviation turbine fuel itself constitutes 30 to 40% of the carrier's operational cost. Just look here. What does a commercial flight really need? A taxi fuel, a trip fuel, a contingency fuel, alternate fuel, final reserve fuel, as well as additional fuel. So for example, a short Airbus A320 flight might end up needing 6,600 kg of fuel. Now, what is this aviation turbine fuel? Let's try to understand this. So this is nothing but a refined kerosene. And a very fun fact, we are almost 85 to 90% import reliant on this refined kerosene. We majorly imported from two countries, Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. Now again, there is a kind of a supply chain bottleneck which has been caused, right? The blockade of Strait of Hormuz which has taken place. How these ships, containers containing this fuel, aviation turbine fuel, will actually kind of end up reaching to our country. Don't you think that is going to be another set of problem? That is why the government actually took a kind of a notice of this, cognizance of this, and started putting impetus on sustainable aviation fuel, which is basically kind of created using the indigenous feedstock, agricultural residue, solid waste which has been generated in the various municipalities, or let's say for example the use of wood, etc. By using Make in India technology, the target was to blend at least 1% of sustainable aviation fuel in the jet fuel by 2025 and 5% by the year of 2027. We already tested it. So India's first commercial passenger flight using such indigenously produced sustainable aviation fuel was Air Asia 15th I-5767. As well as to actually scale up the sustainable aviation fuel production, the government actually was targeting to use ethanol, non-edible oil, waste feedstock, etc. Keep this in mind that when this aviation turbine fuel is actually sold across the state, every state have their imposition of their own value added tax on that fuel. So the prices of this sustainable aviation fuel also varies across the state. So at that point of time, the government was also considering to actually rationalize the fuel pricing by bringing it under the single basket of goods and services tax, GST. Thus, there is a major impetus which is being put on the use of sustainable aviation fuel, which we are trying to blend with the aviation turbine fuel. Aviation turbine fuel which is being created by the kerosene, for which we have high import dependency. So now it makes complete sense that why the government has actually kind of nodded for the use of ethanol in the aircraft fuel. But now let's try to assess that what is the arguments which has been given in the article. Opposition is saying ethanol is less energy dense than aviation turbine fuel, and thus it will actually end up providing less thrust unless and until we are actually using large scale, higher volume is used. You people are like, yes sir, koi baat nahi. We can use as much volume as required. Why? Because we have surplus amount of agricultural residue and waste. But keep this in mind that we are also the country which has been ranked 105th on the Global Hunger Index, where under the National Food Security Act 2013, it is an important responsibility of the government to actually provide subsidized ration to almost 75% of the population. So that is also something where we are actually required those agricultural production, where we also require the sugarcane and the maize which is very important for the nutrition of our country because it acts as a very important cereal. So that is, if we are actually kind of diverting a large scale production of such staple crops, agricultural residues, various kind of bio waste, don't you think it is going to have a significant impact on our overall agriculture sector as well? So yes, if it is true that it provides less thrust unless much higher volume is used, then don't you think that even the taking off or the functioning of airplane can be compromised? So the air safety can be compromised. Third, the ethanol is actually considered as hygroscopic because it ends up absorbing the moisture. So the opposition argument is that it can actually end up freezing at the cruising altitude if the temperature goes below 50 degrees Celsius, and thus it can actually impact the aviation safety. Also, it can lead to engine failures mid the air, because the opposition is saying, look at the use of these ethanol blended fuel in the vehicles. The overall functioning, the overall mileage of the vehicles has actually been declined. It has not been proven and there is no adequate research on that, but yes, indeed, that is also a claim which is being made by the automobile sector as well. So let's try to do some fact check here. First argument is what? Ethanol is less energy dense than aviation turbine fuel. That is indeed true. Ethanol density is 0.789 gram per centimeter cube versus aviation turbine fuel, which has a density of 0.84 gram per centimeter cube. So yes, indeed, ethanol has a lower energy density. So basically, let's say if you are using 1 liter of ethanol or 1 liter of aviation turbine fuel, it's very obvious that for the same amount of oil and fuel, the aviation turbine fuel will actually end up having much higher energy output. Third, ethanol is indeed hygroscopic because it ends up absorbing the moisture. So there are chances that, let's say for example, if you are actually going up, so what is the two best uses of kerosene? First and foremost, the kerosene actually ends up providing high energy output per unit of volume, right? Kerosene from which we make aviation turbine fuel. Second is that it has a very low freezing point, 47 to 50 degrees Celsius. In comparison to that, yes, indeed, considering ethanol is hygroscopic, the chances are that the oil can actually end up freezing as ice crystal, and thus it can actually lead to engine failures mid-air. So these concerns are genuinely true. But what is the government's defense? Government is saying, wait a minute, we have not specifically mentioned ethanol. Rather, notification does not grant any specific approval for ethanol use. Rather, what we are saying that we will include the fuel which will blended with synthesized hydrocarbon. So the government is saying that yes, indeed, even if you are going to use ethanol, we are basically going to chemically process it and remove the moisture content. Then we will use it. So to actually secure the aviation safety. Then the government is saying that if you look at the International Civil Aviation Authority, it has actually specifically kept a net zero goal for aviation by the year of 2050. For which purpose? This blending of at least 1% sustainable aviation fuel in the jet fuel and 5% by 2027 is actually a prerequisite requirement for our country. ठीक है, हमारी गलती नहीं है ना? यहाँ तक clear है. What are some other steps which has been taken by the government to actually promote biofuel use among various sectors? First and foremost, there is sustainable and affordable transition towards alternative transportation, Satat initiative, where the government is actually promoting the use of compressed biogas from various agricultural and municipal solid waste. Second, long-term purchase agreement is being signed by the oil marketing companies to actually procure the various kind of agricultural residue from the farmers to actually provide additional farmer income. Then there is Jeevan Yojana, to actually put impetus on the production of ethanol from various lignocellulosic biomass. And for that, the government is also providing viability gap funding for setting up various 2G ethanol plants. Then there is Govardhan scheme, where the government is actually trying to create biogas and compress biogas plants in the rural areas itself. So for example, let's say if you have a large scale amount of cow dungs, you can actually use that for the production of this biogas. This will actually reduce open dumping and methane emission. And thus we are focusing on the waste to wealth concept, waste to energy concept. Then there is an idea of repurposing the used cooking oil, RUCO, by the Food Standard and Safety Authority of India to actually channelize the used cooking oil towards biodiesel manufacturers and thus putting impetus on the circular economy. Also keep this in mind. There exists an ethanol export policy where there is a restrictive export regime. Ethanol exports are actually placed under a restricted category and require prior approval from the government of India in the context of export, because anyway we are running short of the supply of that. Second, approval is required by the inter-ministerial committee. So any export permissions has to be granted by an inter-ministerial committee which comprises of the Ministry of Commerce, Petroleum and Natural Gas, and Food and Public Distribution. Then there exists priority to ethanol blending program. The domestic requirement for ethanol blended petrol is given the highest priority. And the dynamic policy based on the domestic availability, where the export decisions are not fixed, rather they depend on factors like sugar production level, food grain availability, as well as the fuel blending targets. So keep this ethanol export policy very dear to you. The statements can also appear in your prelims examination. Towards the end, when we were trying to establish this specific argument that yes, indeed, there exists less thrust from such blended aviation fuel, but we can use higher volume because we have ample amount of supply. A very interesting article actually appeared in your Indian Express, which actually referred to the food versus fuel debate. So try to understand this. When we are actually producing ethanol from sugarcane, it actually leads to production of two kinds of starch from which we can derive ethanol. One is B molasses and the second is C molasses. Now this B molasses actually contains high sugar content, and because of that even the ethanol yield is very high from this, correct, in comparison to the C molasses. But there existed a problem. The problem is that the majority of the sugarcane which is produced in our country, right, with the limited amount of irrigation, limited amount of mechanization, right, high scale use of fertilizers like urea, it actually contains more amount of C molasses. So anyway, the overall ethanol yield from the sugar in our country is very less. Then our farmers started doing what? That because the government was providing a kind of a notified administered price. So they had a kind of a guarantee from the government that yes, oil marketing companies will procure your whatever biomass residue at this price. So our farmers, they actually started putting more impetus on the production of these C molasses, right? C molasses based sugarcane. So government actually tried to divert the farmers. What government did? The government said from 2018-19 onwards that the ethanol from the B heavy stage molasses and whole cane juice will actually be prioritized. Then it further separated the ex-distillery prices for ethanol which is being derived from rice, maize and damaged food grains. Thus leading to now look here from the year of 2014 to 2026. The amount of procurement which was actually being done by the oil marketing companies from grains. Till year of 2018, it was almost zero. But after the government actually started incentivizing the procurement from other things than your C molasses heavy based sugarcane, look at the large scale production which has actually increased from the grains. Look at the total supply of it. Look how it has been significantly remained stagnant in the case of sugarcane. Thus, the farmers actually started getting more price for ethanol which was produced from maize, almost 71 rupees per liter versus the sugarcane which is only 57 per liter. So don't you think that the farmers were now incentivized to actually produce more amount of maize to be sold to these oil marketing companies, resultant of which the net sugar output actually plumped from being 359 million metric ton in 2021 to a meager 261 million metric ton. So what the farmers did, they started producing rice, wheat, maize, right? Started, kind of creating agricultural residue from that, waste from that, and selling to the companies. Don't you think that would end up significantly compromising our food security under National Food Security 2030? The maize is also an important ingredient for livestock consumption as well as our nutritional security. So this is also the food versus fuel debate. Yes, indeed, the farmers are actually getting better price if they are selling the same crop to the oil marketing companies as to create ethanol. But for that purpose, we are also compromising our nutritional security and food security. So whenever you guys are writing the answer, try to include this specific argument as well, food versus fuel debate. And we move forward to the next news, where we'll discuss the India-Africa relationship in the context of the 4th India-Africa Forum Summit, which is being hosted by the Government of India in New Delhi with the theme of enduring partnership and shared vision, highlighting the importance of Africa for our country, which forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the larger theme of impact of policies of developed and developing nations on India's interest. So, what does the article says? The article talks about India's relationship with Africa, which delivers a message of stability in the turbulent world, where our External Affairs Minister, speaking at the launch of the theme, website and logo for the upcoming 4th India-Africa Forum Summit, actually put impetus on how India's ties with Africa are rooted in the common struggle for freedom from the colonial rule, where India is also endorsing Africa Agenda 2063, which was adopted by the African Union in the year of 2013. What is the African Union? Thoda sa patience, we'll read about it. Okay? So Africa Agenda 2063 adopted by African Union in which year 2013 for what? To actually outline the Africa's vision and roadmap for the various development initiatives over the period of next 50 years. So from 2013 to 2063. So you guys can remember that how when we achieved our independence, we basically embarked upon kind of implementing 5-year plan. The 5-year plan which we basically borrowed from Russia. In Russia, it was being implemented under the Stalin's government. So what Africa is doing? Africa has divided the next 50 years, right, from 2013 into a 10-year implementation plan, where they are actually going to invest phase-wise in their development initiatives across Africa to transform it into the Africa we want, a more prosperous, integrated and peaceful continent, and also the continent which has a major say in the various global international affairs as well as the various economic discussions. For that purpose, it is also trying to basically replicate the European Union and create its own African Continental Free Trade Area or ACFTA. Take. Now, what is this African Union which adopted this African Agenda 2063? It is basically a intergovernmental organization which comprises of 55 members, as you guys can see. On the west coast, you have your Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, Malawi, Zambia, Zimbabwe, South Africa, right, on your eastern coast. The western coast consists of your Morocco, Mauritania, Mali, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, Gabon, Angola, Namibia. Keep these things in your mind, right? From your perspective of the prelims examination, just read that from where the Tropic of Cancer passes, from where the Tropic of, from where the equatorial line passes. Also, this African Union was actually announced in the Sirte Declaration in Sirte, Libya in the year of 1999. And the bloc was officially launched in the year of 2002 in Durban, South Africa. The headquarters of this is actually located in Addis Ababa, which is basically the capital of Ethiopia. Keep this in mind that the highest decision-making body for African Union is the Assembly of the African Union, which basically conveys the semi-annual meeting of all the heads of the state, where they basically kind of decide together to the decision which has to be taken for the development of African Union. So we have understood the African Agenda 2063. We have understood the African Union. The second question which shall come in your mind is, what is the importance of Africa for India? Let's try to assess that by looking at the India-Africa trade potential. Keep this in mind that India is Africa's 4th largest trading partner. And as per the Ministry of External Affairs, India-Africa trade actually ended up surpassing $100 billion in the year of fiscal year 2025. Where we are actually exporting goods worth $38 billion to Africa. So, for Indian products, the largest exporting market for our country is European Union as a whole. Then there is USA. And then there is African Union. where we actually ended up exporting almost worth $38 billion to them. Also, the import which we are having from Africa is also a very major share of that. Keep this in mind. The majority of this import actually consists of petrochemicals. It actually consists of various important critical minerals. For example, very recently in the last discussion also, we discussed about the India-Zambia and how India was actually exploring various critical minerals in the region of Zambia, which is very important for our mineral security. So, import from Africa actually constitutes 6% of our total import. The target which the Ministry of External Affairs has set for itself is to actually double this trade by the year of 2030. Now keep this in mind that when we are saying that European Union and USA consist of our largest export market, almost 40% of our trade is actually done with these two blocks. So don't you think that we have a kind of a over-reliance on these two particular regions of the world? What happens in the case of supply chain bottlenecks or in the case of trade protectionism, as we saw in the case of the various kind of tariff imposition by Donald Trump on us? So don't you think we need to diversify our trade beyond traditional partners like US, EU and China? The next thing is that there is a growing trade potential of Africa also, right? So for example, there is something called as Myrdal effect. Myrdal effect in economy basically talks about something which we can also call as backwash effect. It says that, let's say for example, there is a region which wants to be a developed region. For that, it wants various kind of industrialization to create various kind of products and thus provide various large scale employment to its people. In this context, also referred to Economic Survey 2025, it basically stated that how India needs to create 75.5 million non-farm jobs every year to sustain its demographic dividend by the year of 2030, every single year. So do we want to create employment? Yes. For that, do we need to increase the production of various valuable goods? Indeed. And do we require large scale industrialization? Yes. As per the theory of Myrdal effect or backwash effect, for that purpose, we basically require an under industrialization region which has a large propensity to consume. So basically, it can actually act as a market for Indian goods. And this is exactly what Africa is transitioning into. It has 55 states which consist of approximately a population of 1.5 billion people. And as per IMF, their economy in the year of 2025 was approximately $3 trillion, consisting of 3% of the global GDP. But by the year where we are actually envisaging to become Viksit Bharat, that is 2047, they are actually going to transition into $30 trillion economy. Just like our country, they have a significant amount of population which is engaged in the agriculture. In our context, it is 46%, and the entire African Union, the 48% population is still engaged in agriculture. But they are very, kind of gradually transitioning into the middle or lower middle income country. So don't you think that the propensity to consume of these people of the African Union is going to significantly increase over the years? Thus, their demand for various kind of valuable goods and services which will also increase. So, as their disposable income is rising, propensity to consume is rising, don't you think they are actually going to act as a very idle market for our product? And we can actually, kind of link this with our Make in India initiative, production linked incentive scheme. And we can actually, kind of start producing large scale products, valuable products, but cheap goods produced at the mass scale for the market of Africa. So there is a large scale trade potential which exists there. More importantly, there is also strategic importance. For example, for critical mineral reserves itself, Africa consists of 30% of the world's cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, etc. All of which is important for the creation of various semiconductors. Semiconductors being utilized in electric vehicles, being utilized in your laptops, even for the functioning of any satellite. For example, you guys can recall that how in the month of July 2025, our Prime Minister visited various African states. He went to Namibia. He went to Ethiopia at that point of a time. Namibia, which is the third largest uranium producer in the world and one of the largest producers of lithium, zinc and rare earth metals. A follow-up question for prelims 2026. Which country is the largest producer of uranium in the world? Thus, you guys can recall from the last lecture as well that how we were discussing that as per the Global Trade Research Institute, overwhelming dominance which our country has on China, it actually gives them the potential leverage against turning the supply chain into a tool of pressure. Do we have over-reliance on China for critical minerals? Yes, indeed. Our import from that stands at $113, while our export is a minimal $14 billion. So we basically incur almost $100 billion trade deficit. The amount of trade which we do with Africa is also the amount which we pay to China. Why? For the supply of various critical minerals. 97% supply of erythromycin, 86% flat panels, 80% laptops, 82% of the solar cells, and 75% of lithium ion batteries. Thus, what if we start procuring these critical minerals at a much cheaper cost from Africa, and thus, kind of start reducing our dependence on China? Also, to diversify our energy mix, the oil which can be procured from Nigeria and Angola, the various hydroelectric power. For example, the hydropower potential of Africa is brilliant. They have major river systems like Congo, Nile, Zambezi, etc. And keep this in mind, only 10 to 15% of this potential has been realized till now. Also in the news, you guys might be, kind of coming across various renewable energy projects which is being launched in Africa. For example, you guys might have heard about Bain Ban Solar Park, large-scale solar park which has been created in Egypt. Or for example, very recently there was this Noor Kwarza Zate Solar Park which has been opened in Morocco. Or at least you guys might be aware about the Grand Renassa Dam in Ethiopia. So such large-scale renewable energy projects actually exist in the region of Africa. Don't you think as a country we can actually start investing in that? We can actually start building various kind of joint partnership projects. That will also not only provide employment in our country, but with this funding we can actually have a great amount of renewable energy supply, and that can also help us in Panch Amrit target. Similarly, there are also a lot of geopolitical alliance when it comes to the kind of a ideological nature, or for example our global diplomacy. Africa is very important for us. So for example, you guys can recall the Bandung Conference of 1955, right, which was convened in Indonesia, participated by our first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, where he basically promoted the Afro-Asian solidarity and advocacy for the decolonization. Even under the Panchsheel principle, we were uniformly in the support of the demand of African Union for equality and the mutual benefit. We followed the idea of Vasudev Kutumbakam, right? The whole earth is one family, which is actually enshrined in Maha Upanishad, right? So for taking the epithet and following it, we actually launched Vaccine Maitri initiative during the COVID pandemic, where we provided grants and vaccine to more than 42 African countries out of 55. Then, even in the G20 summit of 2023, we actually were kind of a trailblazer or a kind of a driving force to make sure that African Union is actually included as an official member of G20 countries. Thus, we have played a very pivotal role in shaping the diplomacy as well as the international relations of African Union, but African Union is equally important for us at the international sphere. Why? The support of African Union to its claim in UNSC and UNGA, and for securing their support also. So you guys know or might be knowing that how, when it comes to the UNSC reforms, our country is part of G4 grouping. G4 basically consists of your India, Germany, Japan, right? Such nations who are actually demanding for the reforms to take place in UNSC, to actually for the expansion of UNGA, Brazil, Germany, India, Japan, etc. What we are demanding? The permanent seats to be increased by 6. 2 permanent seats to be given to Africa, and to include India also as a permanent member. Even the expansion of non-permanent seats. These are the kind of the demands which has been actually done by the African Union also. So we are in that case a kind of have a mutual relationship, symbiotic relationship. Even when it comes to veto, India or the G4 grouping says that the new permanent member shall not exercise the veto right until a decision has been taken during a review. So 15 years after the reform, the one shall get a kind of a veto power. African Union is saying no, veto shall be abolished itself, or it should be extended to all members including the new permanent member. So yes, there are some ideological differences, but don't you think that for the claim of India to get to permanent seat at UNSC or even to African Union to be included in the UNSC, right? Don't you think both have a kind of a very important symbiotic relationship which to be exist? Remember the other groupings also, CARICOM, L69, Uniting for Consensus. These are the people who actually oppose the expansion of permanent membership as well as to be given to these countries like India, African Union, etc. Take Coffee Club, Uniting for Consensus, African Union, G4, all of these are related to further reforms in United Nations as well as the expansion of United Nations Security Council, very important for your prelims examination. Take. So yes, indeed, India and Africa have a lot to explore in the context of economy, in the context of trade, in the context of geopolitics, but there are some barriers in the pathway forward. The China's posturing in Africa. So while we have taken our trade to $100 billion and we are patting our back also, keep this in mind that China has emerged as the largest bilateral trading partner in Africa, where its trade volume surpasses $200 billion. So let's say the entire African Union, 55 countries comprising of 1.5 billion people, 1/4 of the total import which they do actually comes from China. 33% of this import from China is actually categorized in the HSCM, Harmonized System of Nomenclature under WTO, 84 and 85 categories. What are these? These are basically consist of those various kind of electrical machineries, semiconductors, panels, etc. All of these are actually imported from China without paying any tariff at all. Also, China is actually investing heavily in the region of Africa. Nairobi-Mombasa railway line, or for example your Kribi seaport in Cameroon. In fact, it has also created a military base in Djibouti, People's Liberation Army support base in Djibouti. And it is also indulging in various kind of debt trap diplomacy. Almost two of the Namibia's most productive radioactive element mines, Namibia, which is the third largest uranium producer, is actually owned by the Chinese companies. So China already has a kind of a severe dominance when it comes to the production of critical mineral, which you guys can see. The country-wide share in the global reserves of rare earth, or the country-wide share of estimated global mine production of rare earth. Even despite that, it is actually trying to secure supply chains from Africa as well, because they are actually trying to transition their economy very drastically and to emerge as the global superpower. Thus, there are several steps which has been taken by India in this regard. We have almost invested $75 billion in various ports, power lines, vaccine production, etc. The first Africa-India key maritime engagement, ACME, was actually launched in April 2025 last year itself. Under the Export and Import Bank, we have provided a kind of a commercial credit of $40 million to the ECOWAS Bank in Africa. We are also trying to put impetus on people-to-people connection. So IIT Madras campus has actually been opened in Zanzibar. In the sphere of technical and economic cooperation, we are actually training various African students, providing them education, creating a kind of a goodwill. As well as we have launched almost 206 infrastructure projects in 46 countries. Also, there was a very brilliant article published in the Hindu, Unlocking the Potential of India-Africa Economic Ties, where it provided some ready-made way forwards for all of you. First, we can remove the trade barriers and we can actually engage in signing free trade agreements with those selective countries of Africa where we have trade surplus. That will actually significantly benefit us. Then the article suggested that instead of just focusing on low value commodity export, we can actually indulge in joint venture manufacturing. And a very key point. So let's say there is a joint manufacturing project which we have launched, an Indian company has launched, let's say Tata, and we are producing, let's say, Tata vehicles in the region of Africa now. Don't you think it will provide significant employment to Indians also? Yes, indeed. It will generate employment for African people as well. It will actually lead to a large-scale technology dissemination for the people of Africa. So obviously they will say yes. More importantly, such product which is being now produced in Africa, it will have preferential access to US market through favorable trading design. And thus, the tariff imposition which is being done on Indian products, we can actually bypass that. For that, we should not only rely on such big industries, rather we need to boost our micro, small and medium enterprises as well through various line of credit. Take it. Keep this in mind that when we cover one article, we also include points from various articles. So basically, at least 5 to 6 articles are being told to you in one single discussion. So that is very beneficial for you. Use these points in this particular mains question, and we move forward to the next news, where we'll try to assess that how, if we effectively want to tackle the climate change, it is very important for us to actually start taking a kind of a bottom to top approach, where we'll also discuss some very important initiatives which has been taken at the grassroots level in the villages. So what is the context? The first paragraph itself is a ready-made introduction for all of you to write on the climate change. You guys can note it down, where it says that India is the 9th most climate vulnerable country globally, with 430 extreme weather events which were recorded between the year of 1995 to 2024. So in the span of 3 decades, there existed 430 extreme weather events, which caused a kind of a cumulative total of losses of $170 billion and impacted 1.3 billion people. So, in this context, what India has done? India has updated its nationally determined contribution for 2031-35, acknowledging these risks and emphasizing the mainstreaming of the climate resilience and adaptation into the country's development strategy. Also, the updated NDCs, National Determined Contribution, which we are required to do under the Paris Agreement 2015, it strengthens the adaptation across coastal resilience, infrastructure, disaster preparedness, heat mitigation, biodiversity conservation, as well as sustainable livelihoods. So, why India is actually required to take such pragmatic steps to reach to its nationally determined contribution? So let's try to assess the climate change vulnerability of our country. First and foremost, keep this in mind that our energy demand, which exists currently, it is actually going to grow 2.5 times by 2047. And in, let's say, 2047, the total incremental demand from right now is 100. 25% or 1/4 of that will actually be coming from our country. And even today, 71% of the power generation which we do is actually done from thermal power plants. This was also the statement which actually appeared in your prelims examination 2025, where it said that how these various kind of heat producing or electricity, it actually amounts to more than 50% of the total energy generation. So that is a major issue. Also, if we refer specifically to our country, post-LPG, post-liberalization, privatization and globalization, after the year of 1991, even in this last 30 years itself, the temperature for our country, right, the average has actually increased by 0.5 degrees Celsius. As per the Greenhouse Gas Bulletin, which is published by the World Meteorological Organization, the average temperature rise globally has been 1.45 degrees Celsius from the pre-industrial level. So the ideal target which we set for ourselves in the Paris Agreement 2015, right, globally, was that we'll try to reduce the increase in the global temperature by 2 degrees Celsius by 2100, and ideally we'll try to limit it down further to 1.5 degrees Celsius. We have already reached to 1.45 degrees Celsius. In 2025 itself, there took place 77 heat wave events in our country, spanning a kind of a cumulative 360 days across the country. Don't you think as the global temperature will keep on increasing, the temperature in our country, the average temperature will increase, more number of heat wave cases, more number of large scale uses of refrigeration, air conditioners, etc. Don't you think the energy demand will further increase? So for all of this, first and foremost, transitioning towards sustainable energy is very important, and also to take pragmatic steps for climate change. And keeping that in mind, our country has actually updated the target, nationally determined contribution. Take look here. India has achieved a historic milestone in the power sector already, where we have surpassed 500 gigawatt and renewable energy generation exceeds 50% of the demand. Keep this in mind. Now let's try to see what were the previous target, what was the progress which we achieved, and what are the new targets which we have set for ourselves to achieve from the cycle of 2031 to 2035. So the previous target was to reduce the carbon emission intensity of GDP growth by 45%. Right? We have reduced it by 36% till now, and we are saying that we will reduce it by 47% by the year of 2035 from 2005 level. Then 50% installed power capacity from non-fossil fuel power. We have already surpassed that, as you guys can see. Currently installed power capacity is 52.5% from non-fossil. We are saying we'll further, kind of ramp it up to 60% by 2035. Then we took up a target on ourselves. We said that we will add 2.5 to 3 billion tons of additional carbon dioxide carbon sink. Current total carbon sink which exists in our country is 2.2 billion tons of CO2, right? From the forest. Look here, India lost 18 times more forest than it gained between 2015 to 2019. Now we have actually, even in this context, we are saying that no, we are going to increase further the carbon dioxide sequestration of 3.5 to 4 billion tons. What are the hurdles to achieve all of this? First and foremost, even when we talk about, let's say for example, to reduce the carbon emission, as you guys can see, the total amount of power generation, even 71% of that actually comes from thermal power sector. So we are majorly dependent on fossil fuel based energy production. The generational power capacity of this renewable energy, even though the installed is 50%, but the generational capacity is only over 20%. That's why 71% is being procured from thermal power plants. Okay. Third, if you look at the kind of significantly increasing or ramping up our carbon dioxide sequestration, more number of trees and large scale forest is required. But as per the Indian State of Forest report, the total forest and tree cover stands at 24.67% of total geographical area, as we were discussing. So these are major challenges also. The today's article says that how in the COP30, the Conference of Parties 30 of United Nations Framework on Convention on Climate Change, which was conveyed at Belém in Brazil, there was a large-scale impetus on local-led adaptation to tackle climate change. So, initiatives shall be launched to tackle climate change, which are designed and implemented by the local communities themselves, thus focusing on the concept of decentralized decision-making. The power and resources shall shift to the local governments, where we can also utilize the indigenous knowledge and traditional system. For example, community-led water conservation strategies in the drought-prone areas. Today's article specifically highlights, right, or basically provides claps for the Tamil Nadu's climate resilience villages. So Tamil Nadu has a kind of a state-level action plan to tackle the climate change, under which it has launched a new concept of climate resilient villages, or CRV, which is basically a local government-led initiatives being run in the 11 vulnerable districts, where they are basically focusing on water management, drought mitigation, waste management, as well as installing renewable energy. So let's say, for example, they are installing, solar panels on their rooftop under Pradhan Mantri Surya Ghar Muft Bijli Yojana. Or for example, they are actually installing solar-led street lights under your Srishti scheme. So they are utilizing all of these schemes, and all of this is actually being done at the grassroots level by the local communities, under panchayats, under municipalities. The support is also being provided in this context from the World Resource Institute. The article today also laments that how under the Economic Survey 2025 there was a specific target which was actually was given to the government, that the government shall start spending at least 5 to 6% of its GDP for the adaptation and resilience purpose to tackle the climate change. However, the budget 2026 has been caught sleeping on that. That is the argument by the article. For your mains perspective, remember some very other good climate governance models. Like you can actually give the example of Hivde Bazaar in Maharashtra, where they actually entirely banned water-intensive crops and their production in their area and started shifting to sustainable agriculture, organic farming. Or for example, Dharnai in Bihar, which actually emerged as a kind of a fully solar-powered village for each and every function. Or Odanthurai in Tamil Nadu, which has actually recently become the India's first village to install its own panchayat-owned 350 kilowatt wind turbine. So these can be given as a kind of a local-led adaptation examples, which has been done by the various villages in our country. So keep these arguments in your mind and we move forward to the next news, where we'll try to cover the entire concept of the labor reforms in our country, as well as the unionization movement, in the context of that since March, the country has actually witnessed a number of agitations by workers, particularly by those in the manufacturing sector. In the background of these protests for minimum wages, expansion of the social security ambit, and against the contractualization of job which is taking place, the role of trade unions have come up for the discussion. there have been concerns about the impact of deunionization and how it has affected the workers. So first and foremost, what is the pragmatic step which the government has taken to actually, kind of provide social security net to the workers under Shram Shakti Niti 2025 to actually create fair, inclusive and future-ready world of work aligned with the national aspiration of a developed India by 2047. These are some key provisions which can appear in your prelims examination. First and foremost, a portable universal social security account will be created, which will merge your employees provident fund organization EPFO, your ESIC, Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, E-Shram as well as state welfare boards. Then there will be implementation of occupational safety and health code with risk-based inspection. Article 42 of the Shram Shakti Niti specifically states that the government will try to achieve near zero fatalities in the industry by 2047. Then to further have a sharp reduction in informal jobs, and for that purpose, creation of digital compliance and AI-driven labor governance capacity. So let's say, for example, all of your skill set as a kind of a CV will be put in the portal eShram. Then the AI will actually, try to assess which kind of job you can do and will start basically suggesting those jobs to you as well as to the employers. Also to increase the women's participation in the labor force to 35% by the year of 2030. Keep this in mind that these reforms for the labors has also been done in the context of your modern history. Like for example, Shashipada Banerjee, who actually launched the first specifically labor-based newspaper where he started highlighting the issues which were being faced by the labor class at that point of a time. That is Bharat Shramjeevi, the person who established your working man club. Then come your Shorabji Shapurji, who in the year of 1878 actually was the first person to basically put a bill in the Bombay Legislative Council for the better working condition for labor. Came your N.M. Lokhande, started highlighting the plight of the laborers in a newspaper called as Deen Bandhu, conveyed the first labor convention as well as created Bombay Meals Hand Association. Then there was your Worker Welfare Society which was created in 1920 by people like Tal Cherkar, S.K. Bole, S.W. Patil, where they asked for the kind of the work hour for the women, for men actually, to be restricted to 12 hours. Why they are asking for this demand? Because the kind of the pressure which was created by people like Jyotiba Phule, Shashipada Banerjee, Shorabji Shapurji and N.M. Lokhande, it actually kind of put pressure on the British government at that point of a time to take some pragmatic steps for the labor class welfare. Thus, the most liberal viceroy, Ripon, under him the first Factory Act was passed in the year of 1881. Where, keep this in mind, there was no provision for either men workers or women workers. It specifically dealt with children workers. That prohibited the children under 7 years to work. If you are between 7 years to 12 years, you can have a maximum hour of 9 hours of work, not more than that. उसके बाद थक जाओगे. Children के लिए 4 holidays per month. Fencing of hazardous machinery shall be done. Was there anything which was provided under the Factory Act 1881, under Ripon, anything for men and women? नहीं. They were only praying at that point of a time. ठीक है, वो लोग पूजा कर रहे थे बस कि हमारे लिए भी कुछ कर दो. So the government did. 10 years down the line, 1891, prohibited the children under now 9 years of age. 9 to 14 years will work maximum for 7 hours a day. Included the women for the first time and said that a woman can be forced to work only for maximum amount of 11 hours, but for men, unlimited. So for example, when your parents say that, this was the childhood which we had, they were not lying also. Keep this in mind that none of these acts were applicable to the tea and the coffee plantation. So specifically after the Russian Revolution which took place, where the role of the labor became very important and the government's control over the factor of production was highlighted, that led to the Madras Labour Union 1918. Keep this in mind, it was India's first organized labor union which can be asked by UPSC. Ultimately, various such labor unions were created across the country, leading to the creation in the year of 1920, the All India Trade Union Congress, where 101 delegates from 64 unions actually participated. It was participated by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Motilal Nehru, Annie Besant. It was chaired by a person called as Lala Lajpat Rai, who gave the call for organize, educate and agitate. Milk for the infants, food for the adults and the education for all. Keep this in mind that in the context of modern history, you guys might be reading that how for the first time the call for complete independence or Poon Swaraj was done in the Lahore session of 1929. However, the All India Trade Union Congress in its Chharia session in 1921 itself had demanded for Poon Swaraj. Various important personalities actually presided as a president of All India Trade Union Congress, which has been in the news repeatedly thanks to the Shram Shakti Niti of 2025. For example, C.R. Das, Jawaharlal Nehru, Subhash Chandra Bose, V.V. Giri, etc. And what about the right to form union, unionization of the labor? Trade Union Act of 1926 says that if there are a minimum 7 members, they can create trade members. Such trade union can sued, own property and enter into contract. 50% of the office bearers shall be engaged in industry and it has a immunity from any kind of civil and criminal liability. That is also reflected in the Indian Constitution under Article 19, Clause 1, Clause C, which says that the freedom of association to form unions or cooperative societies is a fundamental right. And in the B.R. Singh versus Union of India, it was actually upheld as a fundamental right. And it was also stated that yes, indeed, state can restrict the formation of such trade union on various grounds, for example, public order, to ensure morality as well as the sovereignty of the country. 1st May, upcoming one, is going to be celebrated as the International Labour Day. Why? Because on 1st May 1886, there was a labor unions in United States which actually went on the strike. First Labour Day in our country was celebrated in 1st May 1923 in the region of Madras. And 1933 Labour Day was established as an official holiday in Germany, and from that way we celebrate 1st May as the Labour Day. Keep these facts in your mind. We move forward to the next news, where we'll try to assess the new provisions of the Online Gaming Act which has been initiated by the government, and that is promotion and regulation of online gaming rules. Under which ministry? Under the Ministry of Electronics, which has finalized after extensive inter-ministerial consultations. It has put a kind of a definitive stop to India's burgeoning real money gaming sector, affecting the highly valued startup like, for example, Dream 11, Pokerbazi, Mobile Premier League, etc. Keep this in mind that India's online gaming market has expanded rapidly in the recent years with hundreds of millions of users and increasing monetization. So just let's have a quick look at the data sheet for the online gaming in India, which has an estimated valuation of more than 33,000 crore rupees by the year of 2028, and actually is a very kind of an integral component of the idea of becoming a 1 trillion digital economy by the year of 2030. The sector, which actually registered a compounded annual growth rate of 28% in the last 5 years, and just to promote the section, this particular sector of online gaming, the government actually make foreign direct investment, which we are also going to cover in the next topic, 100% permissible under the automatic route. And thus, from the last 5 years, 22-25, almost $2.8 billion of funds was raised for the online gaming, which provides employment to more than 2.5 lakh people currently and has led to 3,000% increase in the female workforce in the online gaming sector. But keep this in mind, that government also heavily taxes the sector. 30% income tax on winning under the Income Tax Act of 1961. So, what are the new online gaming rules? Some very key words are there, right? So, keep this in mind that examiner can actually very, innovatively use these words and can create some very confusing statements. Like, for example, under that, let's say, for example, I'm a gaming company. So, I'm required to determine myself as a gaming company and register, but it is not universally mandatory. So, I will only determine myself as a gaming company. Game shall seek formal determination only when offered as esports or it has been directed by the regulator. The regulator is the Online Gaming Authority of India. Take. Also, registration is compulsory only if offered as esport. Then let's say, for example, the banks are doing the transaction for this online gaming company. They must verify the game's regulatory status before facilitating such transaction. And it has also created a 2-tier grievance redressal mechanism, where first is obviously a kind of an internal complaint committee which will be created within the gaming companies which are creating those games and offering them on the various platforms. So there are several safety features. Age verification is there, parental control shall be ensured, user reporting tools has been provided, counseling support for teenagers shall be done, fair play mechanism has to be established, as well as internal grievance redressal by the gaming company shall be there as well. Also, some statements can appear on Online Gaming Authority of India as well, which will function under which ministry? Ministry of Electronics and IT. It is a statutory body created under the Act. It will determine whether the game qualifies as an online money game, social game, or esports. It will issue directives, hear complaints, as well as impose penalty. It will contain the government representative from various ministries, Home Ministry, Finance, Information Broadcasting, as well as Sports Ministry. And it will be headed by the Additional Secretary to the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, who will act as the ex officio chairperson, first thing. And it will consist of 1 plus 5 members, as you guys can see. Okay? So remember these facts. It can appear in your prelims examination, and we move forward to the next news, where we'll quickly try to assess the new foreign direct investment trends which have appeared. Okay. So first and foremost, let's try to assess what is this foreign direct investment, which forms an important component of your balance of payment. Balance of payment consists of two accounts, current account and capital account. Current account basically consists of the trade in goods which are net visibles. Let's say, for example, a shoes which we are importing from the region of Germany. Okay. So for example, for the fiscal year of 24-25, the total amount of export was 441 billion, which we did, but we imported more than that. Now recall 87% import dependency for oil. Now recall the import dependency on critical minerals from China. So we imported $683 billion, and thus we incurred a total trade deficit of $242 billion. The same current account also includes trade in services. Export of software services was $142 billion. Increase in the export of financial services will lead to the establishment of various global capability center. In fact, your transfer payments, like for example remittances. So let's say I have a cousin who works in Canada and he's sending me some money. That will be included in the remittances. These transfer payments also forms the part of your current account only. Why? Because no asset is being created or no liability is being generated, and thus it does not form the part of capital account. Such remittances accounted for $106 billion. When a foreign direct investment or foreign portfolio investment is being done, basically it acts as a kind of an asset for the company, and thus it becomes the part of the capital account, as well as extra commercial borrowings, the deposits from non-residential Indians, as well as the loan from IMF. This is the comparison with FPI and FDI. FDI, which actually ensures more direct ownership of business or asset, where investor actually seeks significant control over the company or asset, and it is typically long term, years to decades, generally considered higher risk due to the involvement in the local company. However, FPIs do not have that much of a risk, lower risk, because investments are spread across the companies and the countries, and they can very easily pull out also their investments. Thus, FDI has more chances of creating jobs, transfer technology, and boost the economic growth. What is the recent trend? Recent trend is that the India's net FDI inflow for the month of February, when the war has not yet started, right, and there was not a kind of a plunging in all the capital economy of the world. Before that, in the month of February, our FDI was actually reviving back. Look here. So India's capital flow travels seemingly were set a reversal of the fortunes before the US and Israel attacked Iran, with February not only seeing net FDI inflow return to the positive territory after a gap of 6 months, but also surged to the highest level in the nearly 4 years. So here we are basically calculating or focusing upon the net FDI. So the total amount of FDI which came in our country, as well as the total amount which went out. Thus, India's net FDI inflow was $4.6 billion, and thus it was in positive in February 2026. And it was actually highest since May 2022, so almost in the last 4 years, where the net inflow was actually $5.3 billion. The major reason for that was because in the month of February 2026, USA had actually eliminated the penal 25% tariff, which actually took the tariff imposition to 50%. So it was brought back down to 25% by USA, leading to high FDI inflow in our country. However, if we look across the year of 2025, our total net FDI inflow was actually less than $1 billion. Keep this in mind. The highest amount of FDI inflow in our country comes from Singapore, which actually amounts to 1/3 of the total FDI inflow, followed closely by USA and Mauritius. Take it. These facts will actually immensely help you in the prelims examination, and we move forward to the next news. Where, first and foremost, time and again, I always pray that I do not come across such news when I wake up in the morning to cover the news for all of you. But I think that there are a lot of such people who will prevail even for years to come if we are not going to restrict our law and enforcement in our country, and thus such heinous incidents will keep on taking place. Also, such incidents shall shock more to you people who are going to become the future IAS and IPS officers. Thus, at least you ensure that another future UPSC aspirant, at least, does not go through the same ordeal. The issue is that the Delhi court on Thursday actually remanded a 4-day police custody to the 19-year-old former house help who was accused of raping and killing a senior IRS officer's 22-year-old daughter at their residence in the South Delhi Kailash Hill. The victim was an engineering graduate and also was preparing for the same civil service examination, where she also might have read about the same data about the safety of the women in our country. So the crime which are reported, we are talking about the year of 2023, we are referring to the NCRB report of 2023. The crime which was reported, that was 6.24 million cases were registered, and obviously it was on the higher side, 7.2% more. Murders were approximately 27,721. There were 2,000 cases of human trafficking and more than 110,000 cases of kidnapping and abduction. Keep this in mind that if we refer to the crime against women, there were more than 4.4 lakh cases which were registered. Highest was in UP. 1.3 lakh cases, right, were registered for the cruelty by husband or relatives, and almost there was 29,670 rape cases. Even after that, the government, the law enforcement agency, the police did not took enough cognizance, and such heinous crime was conducted for one more time. From the context of your Indian polity, you shall remember police custody and judicial custody. Police custody is where the accused is confined in the lockup or remain in the custody of the police officer, where the investigating authority can interrogate the accused anytime, as they will do to this person now. The right to legal counsel and informed of the grounds which police have to ensure. Second is judicial custody, where the accused is detained under the purview of judicial magistrate and locked in the central or the state prison. Official needs permission of the court for the questioning, and the prison manual actually comes into the picture for the routine conduct of the arrested person. Take. So on this note today, with a very heavy heart, we have come to the end of our discussion today. Just keep on watching the news, keep on enlightening yourself. We'll meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation, and thank you.